And a very warm welcome to the Scrutiny Board meeting of the Infrastructure Investment and Inclusive Growth Scrutiny. I'd like to remind you all that this is being webcast and that there'll be a link to view this in the meeting webpage for anyone that would like to view it later. For the benefit of any members of the public watching the webcast, members of the Scrutiny Board will be invited to introduce themselves first. My name's Hannah Bithell. I chair this board and I also represent Kirkstall, and we'll go round to my left. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Asghar Ali for Kipton and Hare Hills.
Good morning, everyone. Sonia Layton, Councillor for Guiseley and Rawdon.
Good morning, Andrew Scotes for Beeston and Holbeck.
Good morning, Isaac Wilson, Councillor for Wheatwood.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Mohammed Shazad for Mortown and Meanwood.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Katie Dye from Cullenbeck and Seacroft.
Good morning, Councillor Neil Buckley, Alwoodley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Martin Ali for Gipton and Hare Hills.
Thank you. And Becky?
Good morning, Becky Atherton, Scrutiny Advisor to the Board.
Thank you. Just to remind everyone to please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. And as we've discussed in the pre-meet, there's a lot to get through today and we've got a lot of guests with us, so please make sure that all your questions are succinct and comments and responses are as succinct as possible so that we can get through as many items together as possible. Becky, could I ask you to run through agenda items 1 to 5, please?
Thank you, Chair. Item 1, appeals. There are no appeals against refusals of inspection of documents today. Item 2, there are no items excluded from the public domain. Item 3, late items. No late items today. Item 4, declarations of interest. Can I ask members to disclose any interest in accordance with Leeds City Council's Code of Conduct? I'll take silence as none. And finally, item 5, apologies. We have apologies from the following board members: Councillor Matthew Robinson and Councillor Sandy Lay.
Thank you. We'll move straight on to item number 6, which is minutes. Can we approve these as a correct record of the minutes from last meeting? Thank you. And would you like to make any comments?
It's just a note very briefly, Chair, that as per minute 40, further information has been circulated to members in relation to the careers events, and I've followed up the remaining information requests and will update you as soon as that detail's available. Just also to formally confirm that you have emailed the Chief Officer for Economy and Skills as agreed in the meeting to formally endorse the approach to inclusive growth in Leeds.
Thank you very much. So on our agenda, we have the work programme next. Which we've moved up in the agenda. However, for today, we are going to remove that back to the end so that we can discuss this meeting at the end of the meeting and whether we want to remain doing this the same as we've done it this year. So we will move straight on to agenda item number 8 and come back to number 7. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to come and attend Scrutiny Board this morning. It's really important for us because buses are such a massive priority for us as a board and for our communities, and it's amazing just how often buses come up weaved through all the other things that we're working on. Already this year they've come up in our inclusive growth work, they've come up with our plans for mass transit, they've come up with our better connectivity between communities, with our better employment and skills work, and our training work, and obviously there are huge links between our bus network and our improving air quality and carbon emissions ambitions as a city. In recent years, this Scrutiny Board's received an update on the opportunities and challenges facing the sector. There's obviously been huge challenges around patronage and financially in recent years as the city continues its economic recovery post-pandemic. There's also been significant developments with regard to franchising since the board's last update in November 2023, which I know Tim's going to touch upon. So it's a really timely visit for you guys. We'll no doubt obviously cover a range of topics, some of them challenging, some of them less so. But I'm really keen to highlight from the report at the beginning the really positive information in there around bus drivers, actually those people on the front line who are keeping our communities safe and transporting our communities around. The fact that the response in the report talks about how effective they are, how positive they are, I think is something that I'd quite like highlighted right at the top. And as I'm chair, I get that privilege. I will shortly invite introductions from everyone that's visiting us, and then Tim, I'll ask you to go ahead and introduce the report that you've given us, which we will have pre-read. And then if anyone else would like to make any introductory comments, I'll offer up that opportunity as well. So we would all welcome your insights into what you regard as the key issues for the sector currently. However, to get the most out of the session in the time available to us, again, I'd ask that everyone keeps their introductory comments brief. Thank you. And if we can start on that side and work our way around introductions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Morning Chair. My name's Darren Rushworth, Regional Officer for Unite the Union, and the Senior Officer for Passenger Transport across the North East Yorkshire and Humber.
Morning everyone, I'm Steph Simeone, I'm Branch Secretary at Keighley. I represent Transdev drivers at Keighley and also Unite.
Good morning everyone, my name is Megan Hope. I'm the Operations Director for First Bus in North and West Yorkshire. Just want to thank everyone for the invite, and I'm looking forward to discussing the improvements we've seen over the last 12 months. Thank you.
Morning everybody, I'm Kaylee Ingham. I'm the Commercial Director for First Bus North and West Yorkshire, so some familiar faces in the room, and thank you for inviting me back to share with you the progress we've made, as Megan's mentioned. The key one of which is now that 29% of our fleet in Leeds is fully electric and over 98% of it is Euro 6, so that's been a huge investment that we've made with support from the Combined Authority, and I've no doubt that the decarbonisation efforts are going down well with our passengers, which is being observed within our customer satisfaction scores. Thank you.
Good morning everyone, Gary Bartlett, Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation at Leeds City Council.
Hello, I'm Paul Turner, Commercial Director at Transdev.
Good morning, Paul Moses, Network Manager at Riva Yorkshire.
Good morning, I'm Tim Taylor. I am the Director of Transport Services at the Combined Authority.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Peter Carlill. I'm a councillor in Leeds, but I'm here as Deputy Chair of the West Yorkshire Transport Committee with responsibility for bus, and as part of that I'm Chair of the Bus Alliance, the partnership between operators and the Combined Authority to improve bus services in the county.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm Deputy Leader of the Council and Executive Member for Economy, Transport and Sustainable Development.
Thanks very much everyone, and welcome again. Tim, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And as you said in your opening remarks, I'll take the paper as read. There's a few points that I want to draw people's attention to, but some wider kind of macro factors in particular around where we find ourselves on bus service provision, both in West Yorkshire and in Leeds at this moment in time. Members will be aware that the Combined Authority took the decision to move towards franchising earlier this year, and that's really a very pivotal moment in terms of the decision making for the Combined Authority and how bus services will be configured and delivered in future years. But we've an awful lot of work to do between now and then in terms of preparing the groundwork for both that particular piece of work, but also protecting and stabilising the existing network in the current deregulated market to ensure that we've got a firm foundation on which we build services into the future. To that end, money makes a big difference, and we've recently had confirmation of our bus service improvement plan funding for 25-26 as well, of just short of £34 million, and that gives us further stability into 2025-26 and allows us to continue to protect and enhance the network moving forward as we get closer towards franchising. We are around about 12 months out to that end from issuing our first contracts to invite tenders from operators on franchise network, and obviously we'll build work towards that first service happening in spring 2027 on that basis. In amongst all of that, we also, as I'm sure members are aware, are moving towards a single settlement for West Yorkshire from 2026-2027, and to that end, again, stability of funding and continuity of funding to protect bus services will be central to our aim and our mission as part of that exercise. In terms of the paper itself, there's obviously just a few points to draw people's attention to. There is reference in the paper to the impact of Bradford interchange. Now I know that's clearly not a direct consequence to yourselves, but has impact in terms of the wider network across West Yorkshire. I'd also draw people's attention to some of the activity on park and ride and service enhancements more generally, including the launch of Superbus, again using BSIP funding and plans to further enhance that where possible. Finally, obviously you've made reference to some of the customer engagement and survey satisfaction results that are included in the paper, and particularly the point I'd echo around the importance of bus drivers and the role they play. So, Chair, I shall stop there based on your request for brevity, but happy to take any questions members may have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Tim. Councillor Carlow, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Yeah, I can do. Thank you, Chair. I'll just be brief, really. People will see from the report that we're in a similar position to last year in terms of where some of the patronage sits, and that's the thing that we've focused on, I think, in this meeting over the past few years. Obviously, the pandemic did immediately decrease bus patronage at the time, but then we haven't seen that grow back. Some of that may be from people choosing alternatives to make their journeys, but lots of it will be from people only travelling 3 days a week rather than 5 or similar, and that's a pattern we see. But through that, we've used the BSIP funding that we've had allocated through the Mayor to protect routes. As Tim said, there's more than 50 routes that we've protected since the pandemic, enhanced routes, as you've got in the pack, with some great success, and other little things such as the safer travel officers, the PCSOs that we've seen on buses that you do have highlighted in the report. I think the key parts that I know the Mayor wants to focus on around safety on the transport network, especially that factor of safety among women and girls, which is noted as a particular issue on evening on the bus. We have had as well just the recent announcement around fares in West Yorkshire. So obviously the Mayor has announced that the £2 fare cap will retain until March 2025, and we've been able to continue that through our funding. It's clear that obviously people will know that we were ahead of the national fare cap. We introduced that in September 22, and the government followed the following year. We still control that in-house in West Yorkshire around the funding we have. So the Mayor has announced we're able to continue fares then at £2.50 from March 2025 till the end of 2025, funded through that separate funding that we have. That obviously keeps it below the national fare cap that the government have of £3, as well as the day saver fare that we also fund that the national fare doesn't, which is the maximum people will spend on a bus throughout the day. So a bit of a challenge in the sector, as we've seen over the last few years, but there are some important and positive things I think we're doing to try and keep the bus as well. Obviously, this as far as I understand from the backwards in time when this scrutiny inquiry was set up, this was all around the future of bus provision and how we could push that forward. So the main point on that really this year is that the Mayor took the decision to franchise bus services, which is something that I think the council in Leeds has always been quite positive about moving forward with more public control of the bus network, and that's one of the reasons I think this inquiry started in the first place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pryor, did you want to make any opening remarks? No? Alrighty, thank you. Any of the bus providers want to make any opening remarks? No? And any of the union reps want to? Yeah, Darren?
Yeah, thank you. I think as Councillor Carlow has just touched on, one of the things that's of concern to our members within the bus industry and certainly within West Yorkshire is the advent of franchising and what that will mean to those people that work within the bus industry, how that will potentially affect them going forward, and what it will do for job security. So I think it's kind of safe to say that that's at the forefront of everybody's mind at this moment in time. I will kind of give a lot of credit to the bus providers that we work with, mainly, certainly myself, mainly Transdev, and First in relation to the way that we've conducted pay claims this year that's resulted in a speedy resolution, which benefits not only our members, the bus companies, but also the passengers of Leeds and West Yorkshire more widely.
Lovely, thank you very much. So I'll now open to member questions and comments. And Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 or 4 questions, but they're all fairly brief. First of all, page 21. And this refers to the decline in patronage, but in particular to the under 26, as it says here, student cohort. And I think that's interesting because the fares have been held down to this £2 level. And it would be interesting to know why you think that the youth have not been travelling on the buses. Page 22 at the bottom, it says the most recent trends, if sustained, indicate that post-COVID recovery in bus patronage is slowing. Well, it's not slowing, it's going backwards, isn't it? Because it's gone down from 82 to 79. And then on page 23 at 2.6, could somebody just explain to me that the DFT have confirmed a national allocation for bus service improvement, and at the time of writing, the Combined Authority is awaiting confirmation. I think from what you say, that's probably been confirmed. But and then on page 32, the bottom of page 31 actually, under bus franchising work stream, going on to page 32. The final 3 items there, or final 4 if you like, external legal, risk, contingency and inflation, that comes to more than half the total of £5 million, which seems extremely high. And just a final comment, Chair, that franchising, as you know, our party did not agree with franchising, and we still think that the taxpayer will be on the hook when patronage levels do not increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If people want to indicate if they'd like to respond to any of those questions. Tim, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. In terms of the first question regarding young people's travel, even with those subsidised fares, as you say, some of those fares actually only apply to under 19, so there's only a proportion of that cohort that benefit directly from the scheme that exists at this point in time. I would expect also a proportion of that patronage challenge to also relate to term time movements as well, because there's a lot of volatility in terms of purpose for travel in amongst those reasons. I think I would agree with your point around patronage stagnating and slowing. It is indeed, we have seen a small drop, but a proportion of that has also been a consequence of Bradford interchange across the region as well. That has had significant impact. Your third question regarding the allocation, absolutely right, it has been confirmed, so we do have 34 million of the 640. And I'll just stop there, and I think Councillor Carlin might take a couple of points, and I'll come back to the point about risk allocation for franchising in a moment.
I saw Paul indicate first, and then I'll come back to Councillor Carlo.
No, so I think just a comment on the 19 to 26. I can't precisely evidence this, but I suspect part of it is related to the fact that they have a particular season ticket they buy, and actually for many of them now the £2 fare cap is more affordable if you're not travelling day in, day out. And therefore I think it's a little bit of movement between lines in the graphs. I don't think we've seen no evidence of that number of young people leaving. I think they're just buying adult tickets rather than the targeted ticket. That will probably even out a little bit when the £2.50 fare cap is in. So maybe in 12 months we might see that balancing out. But I don't think it's overly concerning.
Councillor Carlo?
Thank you. I was just going to touch on the last question, really, around the franchising, and I guess it comes to some of the points earlier about the risk. I mean, we see that franchising is the decision that is the least risk of losing bus routes and, in effect, losing drivers' jobs, and that's one of the reasons we took it. In fact, just I guess to answer that question from Councillor Buckley, what the assessment showed was that were franchising not to go ahead at that point, the taxpayer would actually be paying more for services with an increasing decline compared to franchising. So really, the taxpayer would continue to pay for bus services as they are. As patronage decreases, they would be paying for those services, but it would be going to private operators with less control over how we face them. We took the decision that ended up with franchising. We would have control over the network and control over them when that spend was going. So I think we took the decision that meant actually some points showed it would be a lower decline under franchising, and therefore we would end up not having to spend as much taxpayers' money going into private operators, but as well there would be more routes we were able to save and more control over what to do with that money. And I think that's the key reason for that decision that we saw. We wanted to spend taxpayers' money wisely on services. At the moment, quite a lot of that goes straight to the operators through a number of schemes.
Thank you. Councillor Scopes.
Thank you very much for coming today. So I've got a few questions as well. So the first one is around how can we make using the bus more attractive? So I think one of the challenges, I note your point, Councillor Carlisle, about less people coming to the office during the week, and I guess that means we need to increase the number of people who use them. And in my mind, there's things like regular consistency, affordable, and making them easier to use in your car. And I think that's the only way we'll get new people in, and that's how we get back up to 100%. I think that's really important. And sort of linked to that question is how will franchising help that? So I think that's a really key theme. The second theme I have is around safety, and I'm glad you raised this as well, Councillor Carlisle. So the first one is around, I don't think we're seeing any data, and sorry if I've missed it, around the number of cancelled buses or cancelled part routes because of antisocial behaviour. So there's parts of my ward where sometimes the loop, Cockney Drive, is missed out if in the evenings because of antisocial behaviour. And whilst I fully support decisions for driver safety, that makes it very difficult for residents to rely on the bus and use the bus. And I think that's a real challenge we need to find a way through. And I think there's probably a link to some of the Mayor's other roles in terms of public safety and policing link there. And then my last question is around individual safety, so not the bus driver necessarily, but the individuals who use it. And I note on paragraph 2.3, section K, there's some data around people who say they've used alternative methods due to not feeling safe, particularly women, and I think that's particularly relevant given the White Ribbon campaign that's going on right now. And so I'd be interested to know is what data do we have on actual incidents that have been reported on buses or around bus stops in the last, 12 months, however we look at it, so we can try and understand whether it's a perceived sense of safety or whether it's a real, I know safety is much more, it's much more than just actual crimes, it's a perceived sense, but try and understand that. And then the last thing is just around hyper-local stuff, and I think that can help with safety. So I met with Paul Moses some years ago about a little extra route around Holbeck, and the idea was to get the bus to go closer to some of the houses. So instead of the bus stop being 500 yards from your door, you can see your door from the bus stop. And unfortunately that didn't happen, but that sort of thing I think can help, particularly in deprived areas. People feel like, I can get the bus. So just a comment on that. I don't know if you want to comment on that as well, Paul. Thank you very much.
Who'd like to come in on those? Tim?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take those in sequence. I completely agree about the need to make bus more attractive, in as much as we need to get people out of their cars and make the bus the default option for people. And there's a number of principal kind of attributes that will make that happen, and certainly franchising will help us vary and deliver some of those for sure. Frequency of service is key. People don't like waiting, particularly where there's unpredictability in service delivery, and particularly through congestion. So making sure that we've got high frequency routes on where areas of demand exist, and trying to encourage future demand. And indeed we've done some BSIP enhancements for that very reason with operator support. Price will always feature, and making sure we keep it in an affordable sense and a sustainable sense, but also taking into account some of the learnings, again, through franchising implementation of the commerciality of running a service and how we make sure we price it accordingly, that it is attractive for people. And I think particularly, just briefly back to the point around predictability, people want a bus to turn up when they expect it to turn up, they want it to get them to their destination when they expect to arrive. And I think making sure that we've remove as best we can the variables in the system that prevent that from happening through bus priority measures, through better real-time information, tracking of buses where it doesn't work according to plan. We'll make sure that passengers have got a predictable and a service that they can trust. I'll move quickly on to the safety point. Again, the operators may be able to give more information on this as well, but we collect information not only in terms of obviously incidents that are reported through the police and through our Safer Travel team, but through the M-Card mobile app, we also have a reporting function through there which gathers information on the perception of safety more generally. So where people feel unsafe at bus stops, we get information. I don't have the results of that to hand, but we're happy to share the information off the back of that source of information more generally, because it gives a richer picture over and above the actual reported incidents, to your point. And I think just briefly on your last point about the kind of the hyperlocal dimension to delivery of bus services, again, franchising will allow us to do some of this. Obviously, we are already in control and can define bus stop locations. That's a function of the combined authority with support from the district councils. But to that end, we have greater choice over spacing of bus stops, the impact on passengers that have. Clearly, the more frequent bus stops are, the more it has to stop, and therefore journeys get slower, but people are closer to the stop in the first place. So there's a real trade-off between the two of those dimensions there. But we can have that conversation and absolutely consider it as part of the overall customer offer when we implement franchising. I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Carlo?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add a couple of bits on that, really, because one of the key points we see through everything is the reliability. That comes through. One of the reasons probably answers a number of the points that you've raised, Andrew. One of the factors that I always feed from, we're just working out the new local transport plan from the combined authority, but I was able in Leeds to play some of the work in the Leeds transport strategy. We had a figure of doubling and more the bus patronage in that. That was a 130% increase. That figure actually came from those people who told us through the consultation work that they would use the bus if it was more reliable and faster. And they were the two key points that came across from people. They want the journey to be faster than it is using their car, but they also want it to be reliable. If you get those two factors right, then we could double bus patronage in the city of Leeds. It's slightly more difficult in some of the more rural areas how you do that, but that's something that people said we could do. Obviously, through you asked around how franchising can do that. Through franchising, we have the ability to set required reliability in the contracts, and therefore make that a requirement through those contracts, but we also have the ability to set the timetables, so we'd be making the decisions, I guess, based on some of those issues, rather than necessarily having to focus on just the specific budget for that route and the cost of that route. Hopefully we'd be able to do a bit more. I know operators already cross-subsidise some routes with others, but hopefully we'd be able to do a bit more on that. There are highways measured we'd have to take as well, and I think the local transport plan that we're being out to consultation on, the combined authority has asked people how much they agree with giving more space on the road to public transport, and actually the early results I've seen show that people are very supportive of that. I think in a way there's a good tie in there, because when the authorities are at risk and are funding bus services and are in control of bus services, doing more on your roads to encourage more use of bus services becomes a discussion that we all are going to have. At the moment it's a bit of a difficult discussion, because obviously we have partnerships with the operators and we work out arrangements of how that might work. But I think if we're the same people running the buses and the network and making the decisions on highways, that fits in. And one of the things I saw when I looked through, you've got some of the results from the survey there, but where reliability was affected in somebody's journey, so where somebody's journey wasn't on time or where their bus didn't show up, it seemed to colour every other aspect of their journey. So some of the figures where, people were areas of poor reliability were less happy about the particular bus stop as well and the experience of the bus stop. Now, it's exactly the same bus stop that we have all across West Yorkshire, but obviously the fact that their bus didn't turn up on time affected the view they had of the entire journey and the entire experience. That feeds through to that safety. I think in many ways the perception of safety is what we're working on improving. There aren't that many areas, I would say, where the bus itself has been the issue. We don't get that many incidents where on the bus there are aspects of antisocial behaviour. There are some, of course, but nowhere near as much as you may say walking through that area at the same time. But obviously the difficulty with that is the experience on the bus is just one thing, but if you're going out to take the bus, you have to walk to the bus stop around your local area at night, and you have to wait at the stop for whatever period of time that is. Now, reliability, if you're waiting at the stop longer than you thought you would have to, or if you have a fear you may have a bus cancelled and you're there half an hour when you expect it to be 10 minutes, then that can really affect that perception of safety. So I think that's a real key one, and that's where the Safer Travel Partnership, those PCSOs on the buses, are being rolled out. There have been, as you mentioned, 2 or 3 in my mind specific areas we've targeted where there's been antisocial behaviour aimed at buses, either things being thrown at buses and drivers and services being put at risk. And there are 2 or 3 incidents I'm aware of, there may be a few more that operators will know, where we've had to reroute buses in those areas, a couple in Leeds. But what happens then is the Safer Travel Partnership get involved. We run things such as Trojan buses, which look like a bus that's running through a community, but it's actually undercover police officers on that bus in order to catch people that are seemingly attacking buses. The difficulty that we find is obviously if you're attacking buses, you are taking a public service away from people. It's the same annoyance I have with people that will damage their park. All they are doing is taking something off somebody else, and we're spending our money on trying to put that back when we could be spending money improving other things in their communities. And it's a real unfortunate incident when that happens.
Thanks, Councillor. Megan?
Yeah, just wanted to come in around the antisocial behaviour element that you picked up on. Obviously, driver safety is super important to us, so it is unfortunate when we have to take those decisions, and we really do work collaboratively with councillors locally and with WICA when those things do need to happen. I think as an operator we understand that education is really important in this space, and we've done lots of work with local councillors when it's been requested, but also taking a proactive approach to working with the police to go out to those communities, educate particularly younger people on what buses are for and how we can work together to make them safer. I think we just also like to draw attention to the fact that some BSIP funding is used to attract some of those measures, so putting police on bus to support those services. We're really grateful for that support because it does help in making our drivers feel safer and the passengers on bus feel safer, so we would like to see those provisions continue into the next financial year. We've also implemented a couple of changes to support drivers on bus to report these things when they happen, so there's now a crime button on Ticketer that allows them to tell us when something happens and we can provide that support as and when needed. The final point we just wanted to make was around crime at bus stops. We'd like to see that reduced, and obviously that's a collaborative approach between councils and WICA, and with our support we hope that we continue to see this improve. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just come back on what you've just spoken on there, Megan, please? In terms of the button on the ticketing system, how much uptake are we seeing and how much extra work does it create for the drivers, and what's expected of them once they've pressed that button?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is something that we've just rolled out. So we're in trial at the moment on that. It's really simple. It doesn't take a lot of work for them at all. We have a number of ways already that they can report certain things that happen. So it's just an addition to that system. So it's not a lot of work at all. From the driver perspective, there is no additional requirements. They may get a question over a two-way radio system to give more information, just so that we can assess whether we need to send out some support, and then potentially there may be a request to come and provide us with some more information when they're back at depot. But it is more about how we can support on bus, supporting that statistic, so making sure that we can share some real information about what type of crime we're seeing, when and how, and getting those trends so that we can really have a targeted approach to how we deal with this. And from an uptake perspective, we are seeing a small uptake. It's an education piece for now, so as I said, it's a trial. We're running it through, and we'll be able to share a bit more data once we've got some clarity on that.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Councillor Scopes? Councillor Layton.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. The first one is about the accessibility of the apps. I don't want to pick on Transdev, but they're the ones that I've been speaking to about accessibility, particularly on their app. I can't seem to get a straight answer about when the application will become accessible, and I would have thought it'd be really important. Obviously, you've got a lot of people who have disabilities who will be using the buses, and the app is just not accessible. And there might be others, so I just want to point, I'm not picking on Transdev in particular. My second question is about the real-time monitoring, and specifically I'd really like to understand what WICA are doing to work with bus companies. I noted in the report it mentioned that some of the smaller bus companies, or maybe all of them, are still struggling to get that real-time data across. I'd like to understand what's happening there and what the plan is to improve that, because I think it's important to give people that confidence when they turn up at the bus stop that what they're seeing in front of them is true and real. The third point is actually specific to my constituency, the changes that have been made to the 27, 33 and 34 bus. We felt very strongly that there was a lack of consultation with us from First Bus on those changes, and we have had a number of issues from residents that have been flagged to us. Elderly people waiting over an hour for a bus that they would have been able to get in 20 minutes before, teachers having to get Ubers for short journeys from Guiseley to Otley as an example. And I think our engagement with First has been quite difficult. We've been trying to get better data about the impact of those changes. That's been difficult to get, because obviously part of our role as councillors is to support our community and helping them understand whether these changes have been positive or negative, and we're really, really struggling to get that story at the moment. Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, thanks. I can just come back in on the app. I can't give you a direct answer to your question, but if you can let me check with colleagues who are hassling our supplier to get the necessary improvements in place at the right time, I'll come back to you offline if that's okay, and I'll include the chair in that so the committee's aware of the actions on that.
Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the point about the app, so you'd be aware of the M-Card app that the Combined Authority has developed through a third party called Your Card, of which the Combined Authority has an interest. That's proved very popular. There's a huge uptake of tickets that have gone through that. I'm a director of Your Card also, so it's important to me and important to the Combined Authority that the app is both accessible and usable. We have more to do. We still want to do more in terms of accessibility. I'll be very happy to have a talk with you, or indeed any councillors, in terms of what they see as improvements to that functionality in that system more generally. On the point about real time, it is very much a problem for small operators, as the report sets out. All of the major operators that are certainly present here today use ticket machines and infrastructure that reports real time on an ordinary basis. But for smaller operators, it is in particular a problem, a capital investment problem for them. Organisations like South Pennine Community Transport, as an example, have struggled. We are actually working with them actively to see if we can support them in purchasing new ticket machines to get them compliant. Actually, in terms of compliance itself, there is a requirement set out by the Department for Transport back in 2021 called Bus Open Data, and operators should be compliant to that. And in extremis, we can actually report operators for non-compliance on that. We haven't chosen to do that yet, but that is an option available to us. This ultimately will be eliminated in essence through franchising. So the franchising requirement will inevitably require operators to have infrastructure that allows buses to be tracked in real time, and that will be part of the specification and stipulations as contracts. evidently the Combined Authority is also planning to own all of the fleet, and by association the ticketing infrastructure that goes with the bus will be made to be compliant, and we are doing work as we speak in terms of the specification and requirements of that infrastructure. So between now and franchising, more to do, but certainly under a franchised environment it should cease to be an issue. I shall leave the operator probably first may want to comment on the services, the guides, the Otley services that you mentioned. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Kaylee?
Yeah, thank you. And I expected a question on this today, further to recent correspondence. So I want to explain the situation with the 27, 33, 34, but also with the Headingley services that we've got operating at the moment. So with our best intentions, we made a service change at the close of October, which was a highly complex and highly well-planned service change to coordinate 49 PVR across those two corridors. It's a highly complex timetabling exercise, and the intention there was to improve the punctuality and reliability across those two corridors, and to provide across the main corridor, which is the Headingley side, is to provide a more frequent service without any bunching of buses. What we have experienced since we implemented is an increase of about 10 to 12 minutes on the 33-34 side, which is a result of some highways works, which was not captured within the data set, which was the base for the changes. So what basically happens is when we're planning timetabling changes, we base it on a high, a deep data set, and any highways changes that are not reflected in that data set will mean then that the timetable is thrown out for the period of time that those highways works are underway, and that's unfortunate, because that's happened pretty much around the same time that these services have gone in terms of their coordination, and what that's resulting in is severe delays on that side of the coordination exercise that we've talked about, and we're also experiencing some on the Headingley corridor as well. What we've done on the Headingley side to try and alleviate some of the capacity pressure is, as of Monday this week, we've put duplicate buses in to try and relieve the pressure in terms of occupancy that we were experiencing at certain peak points throughout the day. And just in the last 48 hours, we've actually contacted the Combined Authority to ask for an emergency change on the 33-34 for us to enable the data set that is now the most relevant to that corridor to be reflected within the timetable. So we are awaiting response on that. There's, for many reasons, why sort of timetable changes, service changes can't be accepted sort of on an emergency basis, and so we will, of course, accept a no in that case, and we will have to look at something else to try and look after the highways and the roadworks within that timetabling change. What we do know is that the close of February is the next official schedule change, and at that point our aim is actually to re-break the coordination, because it was more effective before, and actually what we've learnt by doing this is that any roadworks along either of those corridors, once they're coordinating, is clogging the whole system. So I can only apologise for what was best intentions with unforeseen consequences because of the impact of some of the congestion, and it's also the busiest point in the year. So we've got absolutely no doubt that come January we'll see a lessening of impact anyway. But as I say, we've jumped in to increase resource to try and reduce some of these challenges. I've had word from the team that the observations of yesterday and Tuesday were yesterday and Monday were more positive at the peak times along the Headingley routes. So we've just got to try and address the 33-34 side as well. I hope that gives you reassurance. In terms of consultation, honestly, I don't think that consultation would have resulted in a different outcome here, because consultation would have been on the basis that the aim is to improve the reliability and punctuality. Sort of everything pointed towards this working, and I think consultation would have been actually quite positive. Absolutely, let's coordinate this, let's give buses every 7 to 8 minutes to the passengers along the key corridor. I imagine we would have got a thumbs up, and now it's sort of not worked out quite that way. So actually, by way of consultation, I think we would have landed at the same place, and having to now be putting these emergency measures in place. So actually, Gary and I had a really good conversation earlier about how we can work more proactively together on this in the future, in terms of trying to take the forward look and put that into the data set in terms of highways work. So that's something for our teams to work more closely on. It's quite difficult to predict the impact, especially at one of the busiest times of the year.
Thank you. For anyone watching at home, we don't usually discuss specific cases from wards because this is obviously more strategic, but I let that one go because I think it's leading to a more strategic discussion. So just to tease those more strategic points out, which kind of touched on a little bit around the data set, it surprised me that we don't already use an up-to-date data set when making timetable changes. And I get that it's up-to-date in that moment when the decision's being made, but up-to-date for a timetable change would be up-to-date with when the timetable is changing. So I guess strategically I'd be interested to hear a little bit more around what the plan is going forward to improve that. And then also I'm interested in the comments that were made around consultation and communication with elected members, and actually how strategically when those changes happen do we have effective notification and discussion. We get notification via the medium of an email saying this change is happening, but actually I don't know that I've ever had any particularly effective consultation with me so that I can say actually that particular part of the estate that you guys might not know in terms of deprivation level or in terms of particular employment that goes on in that area really needs to... Does that make sense? Actually, there's some local knowledge there that councillors can give that others aren't able to, that perhaps would be valuable addition to timetable change planning.
Thank you for both of those. I'm just going to touch on the consultation point first. I am actually absolutely with you on the local knowledge, and I think that the way that it works at the moment is that my team, and I assume it's the same on the part of the other operators, work really closely with the combined authority network planning function to implement changes and to ensure that those are adequate and sort of approved before they then push on to service change implementation. And that is a process that has been really improved actually in the last 18 months to 2 years. And I understand that it was a bit more challenging beforehand, but that communication line is there. I think what we are noticing more and more is an ask on the part of elected members that do have their specific local knowledge, how we can tie that into the conversations with the combined authority and with the operators. I think it's probably something that applies to all operators here, that we might need to have a look at that, whether that's a small sort of consultation meeting ahead of each service change to brief on the plan changes and take any feedback. The only piece on that would be that it would need to happen quite far out from the planned service change to enable then tweaks to the timetabling, etc., to be taken into account on the point of feedback. Which brings me to the next point around the data set. So timetabling changes need to be briefed in to the local authority at 70 days out, or otherwise longer in the case that there's a significant plan change. And so we are only in the position of being able to take out data from circa 2.5 months, 3 months before the service change goes live, upon which to base our timetabling efforts. One thing I would say is that we haven't got this wrong too many times, actually working in that way, and it's usually extremely effective. I think it's unfortunate on this occasion that the timetabling landing with the sort of the highway works is almost in the busiest point of the year has caused us a bit of a challenge. So normally it works despite that lag, and we can't avoid that lag because of the requirement for briefing to the relevant authority. What I think we can do, which is to the point I mentioned earlier, is try and get a bit more of a forward look on some of that. So perhaps we can plan into the timetable some level of tolerance for those roadworks. The only thing I would say is if we're building in tolerance that's not then needed, the passengers are then waiting longer for every bus. So it's a real balance, and it's a tricky one. The agility within sort of bus planning is not quite the same as, for example, within sort of rail services, and that's perhaps something that the combined authority will look at in the future, I would imagine, as they move towards franchising, because they'll be able to make the decisions more instantaneously. Thank you.
Thank you, that was really helpful. I'm going to bring in Councillor Carlow, and then Councillor Layton would like to come back in.
Thank you. I was just going to touch on the point of the real-time information a little bit as well, because we did discuss at length last time in this meeting around the issues around what are known as the ghost bus and some of the work we were doing towards that. We did have quite an in-depth review into ghost buses and what causes them. So for people's information, they are the ones that appear on the screen as if they are going to come, and the screen is counting down the minutes till the bus arrives, and then it never turns up. And then 10-15 minutes later, it just disappears off the screen, which is what's built in there. There have been some improvements made in the system that we found since that. Some improvements around tracking on buses. I went with colleagues in First, in fact, to your ward at one point, and found in an area of Rawdon there is a black hole where there's no reception whatsoever. So as soon as the bus goes over one particular hill, you can't get any data for it for the next 10 minutes, but that's something I know operators are working on. But there is still a process in that whereby those services need to be cancelled by the operators at the depots. At this point, they know that service isn't going to run, so when a driver doesn't turn up or similar, we did find that the largest amount was in that point. Members of staff in the depots were making a decision about what services had to run, quite quick decisions they were having to make. And one of the things, unfortunately, that was lost at the end of quite a quick decision and a rearrangement of time was making sure that the data was passed on around those cancellations at all times. The Mayor has made a commitment to end ghost buses by the end of this term. One of the ways we're going to be able to do that, obviously, as Tim said, is the buses and the data will then be ours by that point on the majority of routes. So we can use that data a lot more. There'll be a requirement to improve that process as part of the depot management functions that we have when we own those depots through franchising. But I think there's a lot more we can do with franchising to bring together the traffic management and the understanding of what's happening on the road with then what that means for buses and how we make those decisions and cancel services where we need to in order to try, because I know that is one big issue that people see. I will say it is a factor that faces, as it says in the report, our same real-time system is used across great swathes of the north of England, and South Yorkshire use exactly the same system as us, have exactly the same problems with us. So it's not unique, but it's something we're really, really focusing on tackling.
Councillor Carlisle, just on the ghost buses, one of the things I've had recently, as in this week, is what appears to be a ghost bus. It gets to the point where it disappears off the screen and then the bus appears. So there's a new element to ghost buses.
There is, Chair, and I've had that. So living where I live, I'm 5 minutes away from Pudsey bus station, which is one of the ends of a route, and many other people will have ends of routes and driver changeover points near their area. What you'll find there is if a driver doesn't turn up on time to pick up that route at Pudsey or similar, it will keep counting as if that bus is predicted to have left on time. What we have is a kind of fail-safe built into the system where, I think, is it 10, maybe 15 minutes after the bus was supposed to arrive at that stop, it disappears from the screen if we haven't heard from that. What can happen is the tracking information may have broken. The bus is on its way, but nobody has an idea. So we remove it from the screen because we can't guarantee that that bus is coming, however it turns up. And I've had that myself, yeah. A few minutes out of bus stations is when you may see it, or driver changeover points, because we just haven't tracked that journey. We can't see it coming. So yeah, let's call that a phantom bus maybe, and that'll make another term that we can have. It's always positive when that happens, when you worry that the bus isn't turning up, and then just over the horizon it turns up. But I'd rather we didn't have the initial worry in order to get that exhilaration at the end, Chair.
You paint a very romantic picture of buses, Councillor. Councillor Leighton, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, just a final 2 points for me. I just wanted to say thank you to First. Actually, you've been really honest and transparent, and actually we've been fighting to just get that for the last few weeks from somebody. So just that honesty that actually, yeah, we're seeing delays. Yes, that's big. We understand why that's happened now, and we believe it's going to get better from January. So just better communication, I think, to us as councillors, and then we can manage our community better. So it's been refreshing to hear what you've said today, despite all the challenges. And then just last point on accessibility, will WICA commit to ensuring all apps are accessible?
I think certainly as part of our franchising arrangements, not just in apps, but actually in terms of passenger information more generally, that is a commitment that we're going to need to make. So yes.
That can also be captured within recommendations from us as a scrutiny board, which we'll come back to shortly. Councillor Ali would like to speak. Members, if any of you would like to speak, that's my last indication. I have plenty to say, but do feel free to stick your hand up. Thank you.
Couple of questions around, Councillor Scopes has asked those, to be honest with you. Reliability, I was going to ask whether it was linked to safety. Councillor Maloney stood in the council chamber. She spoke around safety of women and girls on the evening around White Ribbon. Are the systems in place for fit for purpose, or are they working? Darren, you've talked about job security. I'm looking at the safety of the drivers. Here you have on page 26, measure of customer satisfaction. Councillor Scopes again touched up on antisocial behaviour in the evening. On a point J, it references here, there are considerable differences by gender. 68% of men felt confident in their personal safety while using buses in the dark, but only 41% of the women felt the same. This is a trend that has been going on since 2021. Okay? Yes, we are saying there's a change in pattern, this, that, the other, but this is a trend for 3 years now. Okay? If you go to page 28, 2.24, paragraph A, overall 73% of passengers in West Yorkshire said they were either very or fairly satisfied with their bus journey. Okay? Lower than the England average of 80%. Okay? And the lowest level of satisfaction out of the 34 participating local transport authorities. This should surely have some serious alarm bells ringing for us as an authority, because women and girls do not feel safe on our buses. I sit on licensing and we talk about safety. I sit on West Yorkshire Fire Authority and we talk about safety around how firefighters are pelted with stones and stuff. Here, the systems that are in place, whether they are not fit for purpose, or they are not working, or they are not scrutinized to their full potential. And this is a trend not over 1 year, not over 2 years, this is over 3 years. So I want to know, why is it that it's declining every year? Why hasn't there been a stoppage or reversion? So I'd like to ask all of you that question, please.
Councillor Carlo?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start on this one by saying I'm pretty sure this is not just unique to the bus sector and the bus industry. I'd say the safety of women and girls across all of society is something that hasn't had enough focus over many decades and led to then this requirement to suddenly make a shift. It's one of the Mayor's key pledges to improve safety of women and girls across West Yorkshire, across everywhere, in our parks, on our streets and on our public transport network. So some of the things we've brought in are reasonably new. We've got obviously the safer travel officers that come onto the buses and patrol the network to help people get that perception of safety and to make sure our bus network is safe. That's something that's been in operation for short of 12 months, isn't it, Tim, I think? So that is seeing real results, especially in those areas with a lot of antisocial behaviour. One of the things I will say is the areas like Councillor Scopes brought up earlier, where we have severe issues with the bus, that is mobilised incredibly quickly, and the buses take alternative routes. We then get alternative options in there to try and decrease that behaviour, and that wouldn't have happened 2 years ago when we didn't have those safer travel officers. So that's something that we're hoping improves it. What I will make is a big plug for one of the Mayor's initiatives in this area, which is the bus safety feedback tool. I think if any of us here said we had a solution and knew the answer to helping women and girls feel safe when making a bus journey, I think we'd be wrong, especially because, well, I don't have any answers to know exactly what would be the way you would make that 100% safe, and I don't think it's for me to say that. But there is a bus safety feedback tool on the M-Card app that anyone can report any issues they have with the bus network or any concerns they have to come through. One of the real improvements we've had as well is that I know West Yorkshire Police have the safety of women and girls as a focus, releasing such initiatives such as their one that they've got around taking a walk with an officer so that women and girls can tell them what it is around their area that feels unsafe. And I will go back to that problem with the bus network really. If you take a journey in your car, you leave your house and you get in your car on your drive, you don't have to travel anywhere else, and then you get out your car at the other end. To make a journey on the bus, you have to walk down to the local bus stop, you have to then wait at the bus stop, you have to get on the bus, you have to get off in the city centre or wherever you're going and walk to where you are. There are a lot of points in that journey where you could feel unsafe, and it will need a whole system approach to all of those to change probably how we work as a society, changing the mindset of a number of people as well in order to solve that. But really that bus safety feedback tool is what we would like as many people as possible to put feedback through, because then we can work on all of those options that come through. We can work on trying to tick all those boxes. It will take a long time, I think, to turn this round, as it will in other areas of society as well. But we are really going to work on that. We get that feedback through, it comes through to the Bus Alliance, and make sure we can see, that's why we wanted to highlight that in the report really, how we can see those improvements.
Thank you. Anyone else want to make any comments on that? I was at a Trans Day of Remembrance event recently, and one of the speeches was around the safety of trans people on buses. And actually, it would be worth us possibly including in the safety of women and girls that other equality protected characteristics. And I use the Metro bus app, and I had no idea that there was this safety thing. And one of the comments was that somebody was threatened on the bus and nobody else said anything. And actually, I think there's a lot of fear from the wider population as well, because they're also in a contained space with whoever it is. And actually, the wider public knowing that the very least they can do when that happens is to report it through their own app, because that can be done quietly, although it doesn't solve the problem in that moment, so that we're at least getting the right data, could very effectively be a comms piece for WICA to engage with, and wider with other apps as well. Much as I'd rather it just didn't happen, that might be a piece for starting with. Councillor Dye.
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking through my questions and the things I've highlighted, because quite a lot of the things have been covered already, really, and I did have the phrase Councillor Ali highlighted about 68% of men and 41% of women feeling safe after dark highlighted. What I wondered about that was perhaps if there is any data from that survey that can drill down into those perceptions. So are those perceptions there because, as Councillor Carlisle mentioned, there are a whole stack of other things associated with using a bus at night, including the travel to the bus stop and so on? Or is there evidence? Have people given any evidence as part of their answers to say, because this happened to me on a bus? And if it's more a perception, again, going back, Chair, to the comms piece, is there something to be done by the operators, and I'd be interested to hear from operators, in terms of any promotion of the app safety button, or the fact that there are PCSOs on buses, or some way of saying to people who feel vulnerable, you are safer because of these things, and therefore we would encourage you to use the bus. So I think that's all I'll say on that one, because there's been a lot of conversation already on that one. The only other thing I wanted to ask about was in the report on page 25, it mentions in connection with Park and Ride aspirations for enhanced services, particularly early morning and weekend, which I think I would really welcome, and I just wondered if anybody's able to comment on what is around that aspiration? Is it something that we're likely to see? Thank you.
Councillor Carlo?
Thank you. I'll come back just briefly, Chair, on that to say I think some excellent points made by yourself and Councillor Dye around the comms of that bus safety piece, and that's something I'm sure that ourselves, operators and others will pick up at the Bus Alliance to see how we can make sure every bus you're on there is a very clear way of reporting, and maybe that's something we need to standardise more across all operators and across West Yorkshire so that everyone knows the quickest way of reporting anything that happens on a bus, and some of those measures we're doing around safety clearer. But we've heard that. I think we'll get some of that data from the app. We'll have that at a future Bus Alliance meeting. So I'll try and remember to send that through so that you've got some of that information as well for yourselves in Scrutiny. Maybe that's something we'll remember for if we come back at the following year to do it. But we'll also have a discussion at then the Bus Alliance around how we can make sure that information is on all buses and we're communicating that effectively.
Gary?
If I come back on the park and ride one. Myself, Kaylee and Tim, we sit on the Strategic Partnership Board for the Park and Ride Services. We meet regularly and we review the patronage levels, the finances and the feedback we get from customers. So taking all that into account, we've identified that we would like to see improvements on certain aspects, particularly on the weekend. We're thinking the reinstatement of a service at Ellen Road, for example, at the weekend. Temple Green has a reduced frequency down to 20 minutes, and we'd like to get that back to maybe 15 or 10, but there's a cost associated with that. So what I'm saying is at that meeting, the Strategic Partnership Board, we're looking at the figures, and at the right time, when the finances allow us, we'll seek to introduce these enhanced services. So I think I just want to give you the reassurance that figures are being monitored, patronage is being monitored, but we will step in collectively when the time is right and finances allow us to do so.
Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to expand on that point, people really want to see a turn up and go service and a frequency that people perceive to be turn up and go, which is typically no more than about 10 to 12 minutes between services. So, given the circumstances that's been described and ensuring that they are sustainable, that's certainly an aspiration that we have at the moment.
Thank you. While we're mentioning patronage, I'm just going to bring in a couple of questions around that. I'm interested in the route failures versus patronage and whether there's been any regression analysis around whether or not we can prove causation. So is patronage dropping on those routes where we have more regular failures, so we can be sure that actually drops in patronage are affected by, I guess, a lack of reliability of certain services, because there are services in this city that are far less reliable than others, and I think that's really important that that's recognised. I also would like to hear a little bit more around patronage increases and whether there have been increases or decreases on routes where we've invested, be that LCC on highways improvements, bus gating and things. Has that improved patronage? And also routes where WIC has invested on keeping routes and amending routes and extending routes and all that sort of thing. So, Councillor Carlo.
Thank you. I'll come in just first because the two issues we've taken as the Bus Alliance to carry forward on this year following the feedback that you got there were on punctuality and reliability, and then the safety on buses in general, but the safety of women and girls most particular. In terms of the reliability, I think one of the difficulties we all have as elected members is something that Councillor Layton mentioned earlier. Were this a bin route, we would used to being able to ask for all the data of how that operation went every single day of the week, score through that as members and find out what we thought the issues were. It's a bit more complicated. When you come to this, we can ask operators for individual routes and they have the data for that. But there is that requirement for us to pass data between ourselves to identify, you know, has one specific route gone over others? How do you classify a particular route? You know, how do you look at a corridor? One of the things we are working on, though, is better reporting of the reliability. So we're just working on at the moment, most of the reports to Transport Committee and otherwise have just a percentage, 85% of routes turned up on time. We're working on a way of reporting where we see over a period of weeks the 5 best and the 5 worst services, so we can see if there's any pattern among those. Every week I've seen examples of the data. It's been different routes in the top of there, and then you can see, you know, long-term trends, short-term trends, and I think that'll be a much better way of reporting that we want to test out. We'll then look at enhancing that reporting process as we go. First reports of that will come to the next Transport Committee in January, so that we can see how that looks, how that works. But that's what members have always said they want. They want to be able to delve into that data and say, is the number X bus, I'm not going to pick one, more reliable or less reliable because of works on the highway, because of problems finding drivers. The reality is, when you look into it and try and come up with an assumption of your own, or try and find one reason why routes are reliable or unreliable in an area, then there is a world of different possibilities that you could go through, and there's no one answer to any of them. It does really need every single route to be looked at, or certainly every corridor to be looked at on a pattern. But that better reporting, I think, will help. We want to then encourage that better reporting and see how we can do that better as we go into franchising. I personally would like to start reporting on the reliability of routes weekly, using these same things out to the public so that everyone knows how reliable those routes are, with a narrative that explains what we think might have changed in those, whether it's highway works that have been happening, whether it's issues with the depot, issues with drivers, anything like that, so that people can really see how those routes have been. And I think then people and members will be able to hold us to account a lot better on those services and how they're running. At the moment, it does look like a bit of a grey cloud that we're not used to as members, especially in a service that is publicly funded.
Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points to pick up on. You asked for evidence where investment has seen growth. Certainly in terms of some of the BSIP enhanced services, we have seen that. So the Airedale line service, the Superbus route between Shipley and Leeds, has seen about 38% growth in the last 2 years. Nearly 28,000 passengers per week now using that service. So some really, you know, strong performance in terms of growth on those particular routes, and that was a frequency enhancement as well. So back to my previous point about people wanting frequent, reliable services, that's a very good example. Kind of the corollary of that, in Bradford at least, has been the impact of the closure of the interchange, and we've seen a 9% drop in patronage in Bradford as a whole, and I'm sure the operators may also want to comment in terms of kind of Bradford-specific problems, but with a view to, you know, that kind of level of disruption and what it causes in terms of a drop in demand. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tim. And apologies, Paul, I should have brought you in before Tim there. That's my bad.
Not at all. I know my place. It's fine. No, in all seriousness, I mean, yeah, it's an insightful question, because I think we touched earlier on the simple concept that frequent, faster buses are attractive to people. Therefore, slower, unreliable, less attractive, less frequent ones aren't. And yes, there will be a correlation where routes suffer from cancellations. Sometimes routes suffer from cancellations because of the protection of other routes, so particularly low frequency services. If we're short of a bus or we've had a breakdown, we will generally take one off a bus that runs every 10 minutes to prop up a service that runs every hour. Even though there's more people who would use the 10-minute frequency, actually the impact of them waiting another 10 minutes is less than cancelling an hourly bus. But that is almost a social sort of logic for doing it. Actually, from a commercial logic, you are damaging your best used services in there. And then generally what happens is it compounds, because the bus that's missing doesn't exist. The people waiting for it get the one behind. That's carrying 20 or 30% more customers, so therefore is slower. So then becomes late. The bus behind then catches up with it, and all of a sudden you've created a triple gap in there. And those are the things we have to deal with and try and manage on a day-to-day basis. If you end up in a situation where you're consistently doing that, eventually people will walk away on that, which is why it comes back to the fact, and I know we had a fairly intense discussion on this 12 months ago around the predictability of the highway network, and actually we've seen sort of services in our patch that are running 40 or 50 minutes late due to roadworks. With the best will in the world, you're going to have to curtail journeys to cope with that, and that's a fairly consistent issue in West Yorkshire at the moment, and doesn't seem to be showing any signs of getting better. And I think, unfortunately, those improvements that have been put in have been more than outweighed by the problems that we've had in areas. We mentioned Bradford City Centre, major disruption for 18 months there. We've seen it in parts of Leeds as well, parts of Halifax, Huddersfield, Wakefield on there. And unfortunately, it's that cycle that just bogs us down, because we don't want to run unreliable services. We don't want to have to reduce frequencies. We don't want our drivers to be coming off late for their break because the roadworks aren't there. And then we end up slowing services down to allow for roadworks that may come or may not, because we're accountable to the Traffic Commissioner if we don't achieve our targets. And at some point, this isn't particularly a Leeds thing or West Yorkshire thing, maybe even a national thing, something's got to change. Because until we give public transport better access to the highway network, it's not going to perform to its potential in there. Hopefully, franchising will change that. It will require politicians to make braver decisions than they may wish to, because radical things need to change to get to that point, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Gary and then a politician.
I was just going to give an update really on the question around patronage increases where we've intervened. So members will be familiar with the Leeds Public Transport Investment Programme that was completed about a year or so ago. What's happening now with the combined authority is that there's a process of significant monitoring going on to have a look at the impact of that programme of works, particularly the bus prioritisation on the key corridors coming in. The early indications are that there have been increases in patronage and reductions in journey times as outlined in the business cases at the time, including in the one standout that I have seen is the A647. Please don't quote me on the percentage increase, but I think it's about 27% increase in patronage. I'd need to check that, but happy to provide that to Becky afterwards. But that's really encouraging. That process of monitoring is ongoing, and maybe, Chair, if there's going to be a similar session of this scrutiny in a year's time, that work will be complete, and that might be an area that you might want to make sure that you've got an update on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Carlo?
Thank you. Yeah, I forgot to come back to one of your specific questions, Chair, which was around whether that reduction in services affects the patronage quite greatly. I see it in many ways. Whenever a service frequency is reduced, the patronage reduces with it. And I think it's all around how you're planning your day. If you know you've got a 10-minute service, like I'm able to go up onto the Leeds and Bradford corridor and get some of the services there, you just turn up and you get a bus whenever. You don't have to think about anything. The work on the A647 there means I know that I can get into Leeds in 18 minutes no matter what time of day it is. Whether it's peak time, any time, I can walk up, get a bus, I'll be there within half an hour without a problem. Whenever you take a service that was more reliable down to half an hour, that's when somebody has to check the timetable and start checking their watch. Take that down to hourly, you've got to start checking your calendar. And that's the kind of things people don't like to do. So if you can get that right, where we've got things such as on the A647, where we've got the number 72 bus that comes every 7 minutes, I think, there's a bus along that corridor. It now is 24-hour after first introduced that, first 24-hour service in West Yorkshire. You know you can turn up on that corridor. You know that you've got a bus lane that takes you all the way there in bus priority, and you know you will get there. And that is quicker than taking the car, as you'll know yourself, Chair, because we both live along that corridor. But that is that focus that we're all going to have to do as politicians and make their decisions. That goes through many wards on the way, and we've had to remove parking from on that road outside of businesses and outside of people's houses in order to put that busway in. But it has given that required bus priority. People can guarantee their journey along that corridor, something that is exactly what people want to see. As we go through, how do we do that with all the other routes? And as ward members, what kind of concerns are your residents going to raise when we remove parking outside their houses, parking outside their shops in order to do that? They're going to raise a number of concerns, but if we really want that bus network to work in that way, in the same way as the mass transit network will work, but many corridors won't have mass transit, then we are going to have to make really brave decisions on that.
Thank you. And Kaylee?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to touch on a few of the questions that have been raised. One around the regression analysis or the link between what we would call lost mileage or mileage operated and patronage. So we have been doing some work on this, mostly in the realm of sort of actually if we increase the frequency and the punctuality, what do we see? So not necessarily if we lose mileage, but actually what if we increase it? And to Councillor Carlyle's point, what's the relationship there? And what we've landed at is an improvement of about 1% of punctuality and or frequency throughout the course of the day results in 0.2% uplift from patronage. And that's something that we're you need to take huge data sets to get to this type of result. And then in the same respect, I suppose it's a non-linear relationship, but you might assume the same the other way. So if you lose a percentage of your mileage on a route on a regular basis, you're probably going to start to see that regression of patronage to the 0.2%. So we're going to keep going with this because it's a really important correlation to try and understand. But as I say, it's not a linear one because there's lots and lots of other factors. But we are looking into it. What I wanted to let you know of is something that we've worked hard on is to ensure that in some of the instances that sort of Paul mentioned, where you see where you do need to take a bus out for whatever reason because there isn't a driver or because there's a vehicle fault, rotating the what we would call the bus boards that are impacted by that decision is really important, so that it's not always the last 5 buses of the operation of the morning that get impacted by a driver not being available or something like that. So it's about rotation of that to ensure that it's not the same people being challenged by operational difficulties when we have them. On the operational difficulty side, just to give you reassurance, we've operated well over 98% of the services that were scheduled in the last 6 months, and on the park and ride it's well over 99% of the services. So I'm sort of giving you the examples of how we're coping with these instances, but I want to reassure you that they don't happen frequently. On the question around whether investment in the services has resulted in an uptick, Service 14 is an example I'd like to pull on for Leeds specifically. That's funded and supported with help from BSIP, and we've seen really strong year-on-year patronage growth beyond what we've seen in other parts of the network that hasn't had the same level of improvement. So that goes to show, to sort of support Councillor Carlyle's point, when you start to enhance, you do start to see the return. We see about a 6-month sort of maturity on that, so you invest and you start to see that return within about 6 months, and it's that steady uplift. And on the Service 72, we've seen the same, so we put some improvements in back in September last year, and we've steadily started to improve that, and in September this year we took it to 24 hours, and we are seeing trips being taken in the middle of the night that is not impacting trips sort of that were there before. So actually it's an incremental usage of the service, and what that allows us to know is that people that were previously paying to get around in the middle of the night, perhaps via taxi or travelling in their cars, are now using the bus. So really positive for the environment. Hopefully also gives us some reassurance that safety at night provision is there and is being taken up, and the more people that use it hopefully will feel that reassurance as they travel with us. So we've just actually put our second 24-hour service in Leeds, the 24, as of the late October change as well. So we've now got 2 24-hour services in Leeds that have both been launched this year.
Brilliant, thank you. That 1% improvement to 0.2% increase was really a great piece of work to get to that. I feel like we can quite often accidentally mistake correlation for causation in discussions like this. So it's good to have a bit of data that can kind of hang your hat on. I've got a couple of questions, and then I'm going to pull us to a break so that we can refresh drinks, etc. And then I'll come back in the councillors that have indicated. I guess this is maybe a bit of an awkward question. If we're seeing patronage increase where the BSIP money's been used, does that increase therefore the profitability of the route? And if that's the case, who's getting the profits? Does the BSIP then drop, or does that just go into stakeholders' pockets? And I guess that will become less of an issue as franchising takes hold, etc. But for now, that's a question. And then I'd also like to ask, and just to go back ever so slightly around the reporting element of at what point in the journey does the reporting of reliability happen? So I know for the railway, actually it doesn't matter really what time you get to, or at least this was when I worked there, this was the case. It didn't matter what time you got to intermediary stations as long as you were on time by the time you got to your terminus, which in a lot of bus routes, and to use sort of stereotyping and statistics, means that for the most part, the journeys that men traditionally make are accountable and are effectively reported, but those localised caring journeys are not reported on. So I just wondered whether we report on a multitude of stops within a bus route. I will bring in Paul first, and then Councillor Carlo.
Yeah, I could probably have a go at both of those, and then Councillor Carlisle may be able to add more to it on that. I think certainly in terms of the BSIP, so the approach that was taken, certainly from our perspective with the superbus schemes that include the service 16 to Leeds we talked about earlier, is there is a declining subsidy profile. So it's what's known as pump priming. So we are now in year, I think we just got into year 3. So we talked about 38% growth. So we got about, by the end of year 1, we got to about 25, and then it's grown at a slower rate since. The cost increase is 60%. So it's by no means covering its costs, but that's why the subsidy is there, in order to bridge that difference, and that subsidy is reduced in absolute terms, and then further in real terms as the years have gone by. So no, we aren't particularly getting rich on these schemes. It is the nature, common sense really, on day 1 your cost steps up, so the cost line is flat, the revenue line grows more slowly. And you'll have seen this originally in Park and Ride as well in Leeds, that it grew year on year when it started. It's not an unusual pattern to do that. So the BSIP definitely is aligned with that. In terms of punctuality, so it's observed as what we call it at the timing points, which will generally be every 10 to 15 minutes along a route on there, and you are report on the start point, the intermediate times, and then your terminus points on there. So it does cover a whole range on there. Interestingly, I mean, bearing in mind our longest service from Leeds goes to Whitby, 3 hours 40 minutes it takes to get there on a single journey. We are still measured about getting to Whitby within 5 minutes of that scheduled time, which can be heroic on there. We also have a route over in Keighley that takes 13 minutes end to end, and we're measured 5 minutes on that difference on there. So that the measure doesn't change for route length. So actually, from our perspective as an interurban operator, it is much harder to achieve and to model our timetables appropriately on there. But yeah, it is a target. I think that it's a measure that I think is fairly comprehensive around that, and We do generally, certainly in my business, we'll look at the what we call the all timing points score, which is one figure. We also look at origin as well, because pretty much if your buses don't start on time, they're not going to end on time, are they? So it's making sure we try and fix both of those, get the recovery time right so they start on time, and then try and get the intermediates as close as you can to be. So we have to be within that 5 minutes, 95% of time in there. And then you'll, as we going back to the roadworks point of view, we were looking at one the other day that, again, just outside West Yorkshire, roadworks at Panel on the way into Harrogate, and depending whether we got through the traffic lights at the first go, the second go or the third go, we got through in 2 minutes, 8 minutes or 13 minutes. And you think, I can't schedule that. So we then have to make sure in that case, well, we've got resource on standby in case all the buses have got through in 13 minutes rather than 2 or 3. And we're seeing that in Halifax at the moment with the array of temporary traffic signals around the town centre there, that it's those occasions when it's really, really difficult to achieve those targets, because out of course actions happen that derail your timetable. But hopefully that reassures you that it is a fairly meaningful measure.
Did you want to come back in, Councillor Carlo?
Yeah, I mean, Paul's come in there with the bit around the timing points, really, and yeah, in an urban environment, it'd be maybe every half a dozen stops that you'd see. So yeah, were you going from Pudsey to Leeds, you'd end up Pudsey, Farsley, Bramley, various other stops on the way that there'd be a timing point, but it wouldn't be every single stop, but you'd never be waiting long. One of the things that Paul brought out there was that difficulty of then having to add time to routes, and that's been one of the real biggest issues that we've seen. People get concerned about why they're sat at Bramley bus station or various others on that bus for 15 minutes because it's sat there. That's because in peak time there will have been 15 minutes of congestion, and unfortunately that timetable has to be sat at the same time. We see it on different days. Monday there's fewer people coming into the city centre, for instance, than there are Tuesday to Thursday. So unfortunately your bus may be waiting to make up for the time that it may be lost when there's congestion on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's a real problem we see, but you can't really set different timetables for a Monday as you can for a Tuesday normally, or that would be very confusing for passengers. I was just going to come on to those contracts, yeah. As Paul mentioned, the Superbus contracts that we had, that was a government name that they came up with. It wasn't something that we decided to call Superbus. But they were based on that idea that maybe you'd contract it for 5 years, but only 3 of those would have a financial contribution. So for that airline route, we'd review every time, but for instance, Transdev would have to run it for 2 years after the funding runs out in that instance. All the other ones we've done, we renegotiate the contract every couple of years. And at that point, we would look, what's the gap between this service being viable from the fare income and the cost of the service, and pay for that amount. So every 2 years, we'd refresh that. Quite often, I'm afraid, we're paying more because it has gone up via inflation rather than the patronage numbers has decreased.
Kaylee?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the non-Superbus services. So there is this structure in place financially that ensures that the money that is made beyond what might have been agreed can be either returned, or that a renegotiation contract is in place, a renegotiation process. But I should also note that the services that are sort of not within a Superbus type scheme, generally the BSIP funding that's required is not anywhere near the amount that's needed to run the service as a whole. So that's where an operator would be asking for some support specifically for evening services, for example, while the span of the operation is throughout the whole course of the day. And that BSIP support then is used to cross-subsidise the route as a whole to ensure that route can continue to operate for the customers throughout the whole span of its operation. The other thing I would mention is that we at First Bus actually have a sort of a bound batch of services, and specifically within Leeds, a category of services that we deem our sort of services that we operate on a pure social value basis. And it's important that we continue to do that. We recognise not every service will run profitably. That's not how a bus network works. So where in the case that we do make some profit on the larger routes, for example, or on the routes that are more well utilised, we cross-subsidise not just within the route in terms of evening versus daytime, for example, but across the routes to ensure that the network can balance itself out. Our year-end accounts are available if people would like to scrutinise those, but what you'll see when you have a look at those is that this profit piece is quite clear. So we've made more revenue but actually made less profit, and that's because the investment that's left over beyond ensuring the network operates is invested in the decarbonised vehicles. So just to provide the reassurance that there's a lot of effort that goes on to support the network, to cross-subsidise and then to reinvest back in where that money is available to do so. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was useful answers. I'm going to pull us to a break now for 5 minutes. So at 11:55 we will come back together, and Councillor Shazad, you will be first in line. Thank you. And we are now becoming very short of time. So if we can be as brief as possible so we can maximise the last little bit, that would be ideal. Councillor Shazad?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief. One of the main issues I seem to see with patronage is because of frequency. And a lot of the bus routes, especially the ones that are not going into the city centre and from the outer skirts, and I'm not going to be ward specific, they have been cut from maybe every 15 minutes to every half an hour. Then when there's a delay, people need to get to work, need to get to appointments, then again they will decide not to use the bus because it's not reliable enough for them, or it's taking them too much time out of their day to actually get on that bus to get to where they want to be. So they tend to use alternative transport. And every time that question is asked to the bus companies, they will say, we need to look at the route again, we need to look at the demand, we need to look at the profitability of that route. But again, if you're not going to be bold enough to actually increase those services, you will never actually see that increase in demand, or people saying that we've got a reliable service every 15 minutes or every 20 minutes and it will get us to where we want to be. So as we look at franchising, are we going to be bold enough to actually take those steps and increase those services? Because people actually, if they have those increased services, as Councillor Carlisle has mentioned, if you could walk to a route where you know you're going to get a guaranteed service within 10 minutes, you are more likely to use the bus. And that is a major issue for a lot of people. And the other issue that I see with the patronage and why people tend to use alternative transport compared to buses is they seem to just go in one straight line to the city centre. We've got an ageing population in certain areas. They want to go to the anchor organisations such as the hospitals, but they have to catch 2 buses to get to them from certain areas because the bus just seems to go in a straight line and not to where the passengers want the buses to go to. So we have that current problem when we're not under franchising. How are we going to improve that if we do go, and which we are going to franchising? So it's these sorts of issues that are impacting, I think, bus patronage. So I'll cut it short there for you, Chair. Thank you.
That's good, because you were about to get told off. Who'd like to respond to those questions? Councillor Carlisle, thank you.
I think what you've hit on there is one of the big difficulties that you face when you're trying to run a bus network, especially one in an area as big as West Yorkshire and as diverse as West Yorkshire. When you look at a lot of other areas, they've had to make that balance between how frequent the bus is and how many changes there are, or how convoluted that route is. Now, in many ways in our areas, we've chosen routes that go closer to people than straight along key corridors. But there'll be many other cities you go in Europe where they wouldn't make that decision. You would be expected to change twice along your journey in order to get somewhere. You'll get one bus up to the main road and then you'll get a bus along that main road. Every time you add more complication to that route, you slow it down, you make it go through more communities, you make it go through more stops, and that route will take longer and it will be less frequent because of the amount of drivers you'll need to run it. So I think that's something we're really going to have to focus on. Some of the routes we've brought up as real positives in this are ones that go along the key corridors. The number 72 route between Leeds and Bradford just goes along the main road and people have to walk up to the main road to get it. That's why it can go every 7 minutes. The airline route that we've enhanced goes straight along from Saltaire through whatever is on that main route through. That leads to real difficulties in some of those other areas, but I think we've got to have that balance. And I think as we go on to talking around mass transit and trams, how does that change it? The fastest route to get from some of our communities will be to get a bus to the tram and then the tram into Leeds, rather than spend an hour on the bus going through every village on the way there. What does that change for how we work, and how does that change for what we have to look about, well, where do you stop and make that interchange? Is that comfortable? Is that going to be quick? Is that going to be a fast turnaround? And I think we are going to have to look at that. Would people rather have longer, more convoluted routes that go straight outside their door, or would people rather have a route that in some way takes them to a fast tram or a fast bus corridor to enable them to make that journey faster. In many areas, they've had to make the distinction and change how the routes work. We haven't done that, and it's a real difficult balance to get. Would people rather have more frequent services and change more, or less frequent services and not have to change? And that's real difficulty. But I would say, and I don't know whether, well, colleagues in the bus industry will know more than me, there is a balance between those two. And I think we're on one side of that balance in many routes.
I wonder if there's also something around you're happier to change if the reliability of the service you're then going to jump onto is effective. Paul, either one of you can go first.
Sorry, Paul. Just one thing to bear in mind is infrastructure. So you talk about the hospital, which is really a emotive subject and something we get asked a lot from our EVs to pop into places like St James's. Bermondshaws area is one of the most congested areas in Leeds at the minute. So by putting more services through there, we're just artificially slowing everybody else down at the same time. So if the infrastructure is there, then it's something we do look at. But if we're just going to add in more buses somewhere that is already quite highly bussed and very, very congested, especially at peak times, we're just slowing the whole road network down, and that's something we want to try and avoid by making services quicker, is what people want.
And other Paul?
Yeah, the 20 odd years of experience and surveys and planning sort of suggest that people don't like changing. People do want a fast, direct main road bus in there. The corollary of that is that you can have really the network you like for the resources you're able to put into it. So under franchising, resources will still be finite. There won't be. We are in a mass movement exercise here. Buses work best when lots of people get on at one point and get off at another. The more stops you put in, the slower the bus becomes, the less frequent you can make it. And it goes back to the point from an hour or so ago, frequency, reliability and speed is what encourages people out of their cars, because that's the alternative. And as we've alluded to earlier, the network has some very strong bus services. We do, Arriva does, First does, and the strength of those and the investment we put into those allows us to deliver the rest of the network that doesn't achieve that. And therefore, in some ways, that sort of social dividend is there. Unfortunately, there are parts of the network that are in decline demographically. We talked about customer recovery earlier. Actually, generally speaking, we've got more people travelling at school age now than we had before, partly because people have to be in education or training now till they're 18 and not 16. That is a growth market. What has declined is the number of people over the age of 60 travelling. There was a notable drop-off post-COVID, which I think has wider social impacts of isolation and exclusion in there. And generally areas that have an older population will be seeing their average trip rates go down. And therefore you may have a situation where it's not sustainable to run a service in there. What I will say about reliability is, generally speaking, those services that are half-hourly and hourly get more control and monitoring and keeping services going than those that are less frequently, but equally are then most subject to disruption when there's roadworks, because it's harder to recover a gap in service on there. So we're in danger of a bus economics seminar here, aren't we, with these answers? But it is around demand, actually, and it's mass movement, and then setting that aside, well, actually, what priorities do you need? And absolutely, you're right, if you can get all the buses to go via the local hospital, brilliant. If that going via the local hospital adds 20 minutes onto your end-to-end journey time, you're going to disenfranchise more people than you would serve by running that through. And it's making sure that, I mean, Leeds has a good bus station. People are more likely to interchange at a bus station than they are out on the street. So we've seen that actually in Bradford when the bus station's shut. We've seen far fewer people boarding at the replacement stop just outside it, and more at the actual on-street stops further in town, because now there's no point in walking to the start of the route where the bus is waiting in a nice warm interchange. Actually, it's making sure if you are going to design interchange, particularly with mass transit, you learn from the experiences of Nottingham, who tried it and failed, of London, who tried it and failed in Croydon, and others who have not designed the interchange to be seamless. So if you put a tram stop here and then the bus goes from 2 blocks round the corner, that's not interchange. You need to design it where the tram and the bus platform are adjacent, then people will quite happily do it. And it's all part of the evolution of the network, really, and I'm sure colleagues from Wicker will be dealing with that in due course.
Thank you. Tim, any final comments?
Yeah, just a very brief point. Thank you, Chair. We probably shouldn't be surprised that the way the Command Authority frames and takes decisions around its tendered network are different to the way that operators make decisions around their commercial network. And, you know, our obligation is to ensure access to socially necessary services, and therefore the way that we design parts of the network that are not commercially viable is different to the way that decisions are taken around parts of the commercial network. And again, you know, that affects the way that routes are run and the timetables are prepared. And again, this is one of the key features of franchising, is clearly that becomes a singular exercise as opposed to an exercise which is done, albeit very closely in collaboration, is ultimately done for different purposes. And again, franchising will give us, you know, totality of that decision making in due course.
Thank you. Councillor Riley?
Just back to the around safety of women and girls for a second. It's a comment, and then I've got a question, if that's okay. So the comment is, there's this use of the word perception. For me, I think that's a little bit worrying, because the perception suggests something that's imagined rather than a very real fear. And I'll give you the reasoning behind that. I had to look up the details of it. One of my residents contacted me. She's a Muslim woman who wears a niqab, right? She was spat at and called a terrorist on one of the buses on her way home from town. So she is not from a privileged background, so she doesn't have a choice to use an alternative route of transport, so she's very reliant on buses. So in that circumstance, her fear is very real, it's not perceived. So that's just a comment on that. And then a question for the union reps. If with the introduction of bus franchising, what are your key concerns around job security and working conditions? If you could explain some of the risks and some of the any benefits that you see, that would be quite helpful.
Thank you. Darren?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I'm kind of just going to go back to the safety element, if I can. And we have within the union, certainly within this region, what's called the Women's Passenger Network, and what that is that's a group of women bus drivers that work in the industry, and they've undertaken their own survey that absolutely confirms what Councillor Ali has just confirmed, that it's not perception. That the fact that we have female bus drivers that don't feel safe after dark driving buses, and some of their experiences will replicate what is in the local authorities survey. So it absolutely isn't perception, and it is, you know, 100% real, and they, along with, you know, other bus users, experience it on a regular basis. We are inviting actually to that forum some of the bus providers to kind of meet with some of our colleagues to kind of discuss and kind of almost in a way enlighten them to what it's like to be a bus driver. If you kind of align that with also being a passenger, it is very real, very real. But I kind of also accept what Councillor Kyle has said is that, you know, how do you tackle it? It's not an easy thing to tackle, and it certainly won't be done in the short term, but it's something that I think everybody has to commit to doing and ensuring that we have bus users that feel as safe as possible when they're on the bus, because that will only benefit everybody. Because let's be honest with you, if you don't feel safe on a bus, you're not going to get on a bus. You're going to use everything, you know, every other means of travelling that doesn't involve getting on or in something that you don't believe is safe. So that's that point. In relation to franchising, so franchising is a bit of a difficult one because it's new to us here in West Yorkshire. But what we can learn from is what's happened over in Manchester and other places where franchising has already come in. And what we kind of learnt from there is that we need to be at the table when we're talking about franchising, to express the concerns of those people that work in the bus industry. What are those concerns? You know, job security. There is potential that every kind of 5 years that you may be working for, I don't know, you may be working for First for 5 years. At the end of that tender, you may be working for Arriva. At the end of that tender, you may be working for Transdev. So the concern is about how the terms and conditions of those workers are protected at the point that you TUPE transfer to the different operators. Of course, our concern is that if you've got an operator that pays far less than, you know, operator A pays far less than operator B, then the likelihood is that puts them in a better position to be able to kind of win the contract. How does that then affect going forward the fact that you've got a two-tier workforce potentially, one that's earning far less than a group of drivers that have been TUPE'd in? What we've found in Manchester and those areas is that those that paid the best, everybody migrated to them, and then when somebody else increased their pay rates, everybody then migrated across. That's no good for anybody. Having drivers migrating companies on a regular basis is no good, and they're the conversations that we're having with the local authority in relation to franchising, to how we can kind of make that better than it has been over in the northwest. And you know, we are doing that on a regular basis. So,
would anyone else like to come in on that at all? Tim?
Just briefly, Chair. It clearly is you know, very pertinent for drivers, but also relevant to engineering staff in depots too. You know, this applies across the whole industry. And I'd echo the points, you know, we want a stable system which has got a stable driver workforce in it as well. I think that's really key, and you know, I'm keen to engage and have those conversations, learn from the likes of Greater Manchester. I'm certainly very grateful that Greater Manchester went first, because you know, we want to learn from their mistakes, I'm sure, and make sure that you know, any of the improvements that we can make from them being on the front of this process can be adopted here in West Yorkshire too.
Thank you. I came with a number of questions as well, many of which I've just sort of thrown in at opportune moments in the meeting, but there's a couple of bits that I'm yet to ask, so I'll do those now, and then we'll bring the item to a close. One is, I guess, less a question and more a request. I've really noticed the difference between now that the X number buses with their limited stops being located in the timetable around being able to access it after school drop-off. Previously, there's been the shorter, the longer journey time buses have been the ones that were available after school drop-offs. And there seems to have been an amendment that means that now that's not the case. And it, in terms of that discussion around women and girls and being able to access based on caring responsibilities, etc., having access to a bus that links to the fact that the schools drop off and gives you enough time to get to the local stop in order to then make it into town on the quicker bus is revolutionary in terms of access to working in the city centre. And I'm not 100% convinced that hasn't happened by accident. But nevertheless, I'd like it duly noted that it's excellent, and I would love to see that on routes with a limited stop service being able to be considered in future timetable planning moving forward. I also would like to see us increase, and this is more for Wyker. We had a spec walk with the Sight Loss Council recently, and one of the things that they spoke to us about as scrutiny members was the fact that when they press the information button on the real-time bus stops, it's almost impossible to hear it because it's so quiet. So I would like for us to make the recommendation that those be increased in volume, and I brought this to Scrutiny Board members in the pre-meeting to check that members were happy with me raising that. And actually it was requested that we slightly modify it to be that in the short term we raise the volume, but actually moving forward we look at the potential for a headphone jack slot or a Bluetooth link or some sort of GPS cage system where when they walk into that they're able to automatically get that information. Obviously those are very expensive solutions, so at no point are we suggesting that will happen with any immediacy, but to put it on record and codify that that would be something we'd love to see move forward towards, so that those people with visual impairments are able to more effectively access that real-time information, especially as those improvements are being made to the real-time information. It's not fair if some members of the community can't access it. Any comments anyone wants to make back on that? Councillor Carlo?
I'll come in briefly around your first point around the network. I think it's no surprise really that the network, as has been for many years, much of it is based on default commuting. As Paul said earlier, you take one person from, get to a stop where there's a lot of people, take them to one location. That's the best way of having an effective bus network. That has, for years, been based on that default commuting pattern, which has favoured men in the bus network probably more than others, and favoured those people who work in the city centre and just want to go from their community as fast as possible to the city centre. Those ex-services then were based on that, and many of them happen until 9 o'clock, and the last limited stop will get you into the city centre for 9 to be at your desk, really, because that's where that's come. I'd say probably you're completely right that that's happened by accident, and that will be the advent of more flexible working that has meant that some people are getting into the office for 10 o'clock or 9:30 or similar. That's a benefit to everyone, really, because one of the problems with the transport network, with the roads and with the buses, is that there are a huge amount of people on them between 7 and 9, and then suddenly you've got to continue running that bus for the rest of the day with much fewer people on it, and then you get to the peak time again. The more flexibility we can have around that, especially in terms of, to be honest, having fewer people on the road between that hour, means that our bus networks can be more reliable the whole way. But it does put that point across that we've been working through and try and work. How do, some of the people that have the hardest time are those that make the most complex journeys, those that have to take a bus to a school first and then take the bus to work or to the shops or similar. That is incredibly difficult on the network that we've got at the moment for many reasons and for historical reasons, but how do we build that all in as it goes forward? I think around the real-time information, there have been ongoing issues with those, the information not being loud enough, especially in areas of high traffic volume, and being able to hear it in the middle of the city centre with everything else going on has been a bit of a problem that I don't think was identified at first. I don't know if Tim's got anything around the improvements to that.
And just on that point, Chair, very happy to work with you and the group you referenced to look at that, in terms of making it more accessible. Because, as you say, particularly as Councillor Carlo mentioned, that those noisy stops and those main road corridors where this is a problem, we'll definitely look at working with that. So if you can give me an action to come and talk with you and the group, that would be very welcome. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And with that, I will close the discussion element. In terms of actions recommendations, obviously we've got that one on the volume of the stops. I think it would be worth us putting together a note that includes also the request around the standardisation of comms around safety, because that's come out quite strongly today, and then also linking to that accessibility piece on the volume of stops, the accessibility of the apps. Those would be the three that I think have come out the strongest. Councillor Scopes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the things I think that's been said that I think is really important in terms of making the network work is around the road infrastructure working for buses, particularly in congested areas and at busy times, so buses remain reliable. And I think that'd be a really good way to get bus patronage up. And two, I think the comments made about making sure that the mass transit, which we hope comes, is linked to the buses, is linked to the trains. And I think those two things, in my view, would be worth also resolving, that we think that's an important factor because it's so fundamental to the bus network and franchising being successful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scopes, that's excellent. I'm looking at members of the board. Are we happy with those suggestions to form the content? And is there anything anyone else has noticed that they would like included? No? Excellent. I also just wanted to mention that we've heard a few times today around the difficulties around the roadworks. And I realise that they cause real issues for buses, but I also think it's worth noting that it's pretty incredible the amount of roadworks we've got and how effectively that means officers are achieving grant funding in order to make those improvements. Like there's definitely a piece there around, actually we spend a lot of time in this scrutiny board complaining about the roads, and there is clearly a lot of work being done to improve our roads. And yeah, I guess that's just something that kept springing to mind, and I'm not one to keep things in. So there we go. And with that, I will thank all of our visitors for coming. It has been a really useful discussion. We're going to very quickly discuss the work programme, but don't feel like you need to stay for that. You are more than welcome to head off, and thank you. So, for members, we're going to we're going to drop back onto agenda item number 7, which is our work programme. And are people happy with the work programme as outlined? Is there any additions, takeaway, anything like that? We're content. We were also going to include in this section a discussion of whether we wanted to keep buses as a single item agenda moving forward into next year, or whether we wanted a shorter debate and to add another agenda item in. Has anyone got any thoughts on that? Councillor Dye?
My thought would be, particularly with franchising on the horizon, to keep it as a single issue.
Okay, I'm seeing nods from members. Is that everyone in agreement? Okay, in which case that is what we will put on the draft work agenda for next year. And with that, our next meeting is in 2025. Oh yes. Go, Becky.
Sorry, I feel like I'm going on about this a lot, but you've got a remote budget working group on the 9th of December, 1 till 2:30 p.m. Just if I could encourage as many people to be there as possible, so we can capture as many views as possible as part of the composite scrutiny working group, scrutiny statement that will then go to the executive board for their meeting on the 11th of February.
Outstanding. And 22nd of January is the next official scrutiny board. Have a very lovely break when it comes. Thank you.